The numbers on the depth gauge ticked past 300 meters as I eased the Spectre through the thermocline. My hand stayed steady on the controls, making small corrections to keep our descent smooth. The viewport showed nothing but deepening blue, that particular shade of ocean that existed somewhere between daylight and true darkness. I'd made this trip down hundreds of times before, but never in a submersible coated in experimental polychrome glass that supposedly made us invisible to everything out there. This is insane. Guys, absolutely insane. Nick Payne's voice cut through the quiet hum of the life support systems. I could hear the grin in his words without looking back at him. We're literally invisible right now. The coating reflects everything around us perfectly. It's like we're ghosts in the ocean. I checked the pressure readings and made a minor adjustment to the ballast. The Spectre responded exactly as it should, which was about the only thing going right with this dive. Payne had spent the last 20 minutes filming everything on his phone, narrating to his followers like he was hosting some kind of adventure show instead of sitting in a cramped titanium sphere 7 miles off the coast of Guadalupe Island. The polychrome glass bends light in a way that, what was it you said, Bryce? Something about wavelengths? It mirrors the surrounding environment, I said, not taking my eyes off the instrument panel. Reflects instead of refracts. Right, so we're basically a mirror down here. Anything looking at us just sees more ocean. He shifted in his seat behind me, and I heard the soft thump of his phone case hitting the viewport glass. Can you imagine what we might see? Great whites come down this deep sometimes, right? Sometimes. I adjusted our rate of descent as we passed 350 meters. The water temperature had dropped to 8 degrees Celsius, but we're going deeper than they usually hunt. Payne had contacted me 6 weeks ago through my business website. He wanted someone experienced to pilot a submersible dive, someone who knew the waters around Guadalupe and wouldn't ask too many questions about experimental equipment. The money he offered was enough to cover my boat's engine repairs and then some. Enough to make me ignore the warning signs I normally would have paid attention to. I should have walked away when he showed me the Spectre for the first time. The polychrome coating looked impressive. Sure, like mother of pearl mixed with oil slick, constantly shifting colors as it reflected everything around it. But experimental technology and deep ocean dives made for a dangerous combination. The ocean didn't care how cutting-edge your equipment was. It found weaknesses and exploited them without mercy. But Payne's deposit had already cleared by then, and I'd already told myself that the coating was just window dressing. The Spectre's actual structure was sound. Titanium hull, rated for depths well past what we'd reached today, redundant life support systems, proper ballast controls. The submersible itself wasn't the problem. The problem was sitting behind me, narrating our descent like we were on some kind of amusement park ride. We're at 400 meters now, Payne said, reading the depth gauge over my shoulder. That's like, 1,300 feet? The pressure out there would crush a human body instantly. But in here, we're completely safe. This titanium sphere can handle anything. I tapped the sonar display, checking for any large objects in our vicinity. The screen showed nothing but empty water and the distant rocky bottom still another 100 meters below us. Exactly what I expected to see. Exactly what I wanted to see. How much deeper are we going? Payne asked. 500 meters. Then we level out and cruise along the shelf for 30 minutes before heading back up. And that's where we'll see the sharks, right? The big ones? Maybe. I made another small adjustment to our trim. No guarantees. This isn't SeaWorld. He laughed, that easy, confident sound of someone who'd never had to worry about consequences. Come on, Bryce. You've been diving these waters for what, 15 years? You've got to have a sense for where they are. The ocean's a big place. But you brought us to Guadalupe for a reason. This is where the great whites come, right? To hunt seals. Yeah. I checked our descent rate again. Still smooth. But we're deeper than they usually go. You wanted the deep dive, remember? I wanted the experience, Payne said. And this coating makes it possible to get way closer than anyone else ever has. They won't even see us coming. That was the theory anyway. Payne had explained it all to me when he first pitched the dive. How the polychrome glass would make us effectively invisible to marine life. How we could observe sharks in their natural behavior without disturbing them. He'd shown me videos of the coating being tested in pools and shallow water, fish swimming right past without reacting. But those tests hadn't been done at 500 meters depth. And they hadn't been done with animals that had evolved to hunt in near total darkness. Creatures that relied on more than just vision to find their prey. The depth gauge read 470 meters when I first noticed it. I was running through my standard instrument check. Depth, pressure, oxygen levels, battery reserves, ballast status, when something on the sonar display caught my attention. A contact, appearing at the edge of the screen's range, moving toward us from the east. I leaned forward, studying the return signal. The sonar painted objects in simple geometric terms: size, distance, relative speed. This object measured roughly 18 meters long. Big enough to be notable. Big enough to be dangerous. What is it? Payne had noticed me focusing on the screen. Something out there. I adjusted the sonar's sensitivity, trying to get a clearer reading. East of our position, moving this way. A shark. The excitement in his voice made my jaw tighten. Maybe. Too far to tell. How big? I read the measurements again, making sure I wasn't misinterpreting the data. 18 meters, give or take. 18 meters? That's like 60 feet. Payne shifted in his seat, and I heard him fumbling with his phone. That's impossible. Great whites don't get that big. No, I said. They don't. The contact continued moving toward us, closing the distance at a steady pace, not the erratic darting movement of a fish, but something more deliberate, more purposeful. I watched the sonar screen and felt that old familiar tension settle into my shoulders, the kind that came from 15 years of knowing when something wasn't right. Could it be a whale? Payne asked. Wrong shape. Too streamlined. I made a minor course correction, angling us slightly away from the approaching contact. Whales show up differently on sonar. This is something else. But what else could be that big? I didn't answer. The contact was at 50 meters now and still closing. I could see it moving on the screen with that same steady, purposeful speed, tracking toward our position like it knew exactly where we were. So much for being invisible. Bryce. Payne's voice had lost some of its enthusiastic edge. Get your camera ready, I said. Point it straight ahead through the viewport. I heard him move, pressing himself closer to the glass. The viewport was small, only 45 centimeters in diameter, but it gave us our only direct view of the water outside. Everything else we saw came through cameras and sensors, filtered through screens and electronics. The depth gauge read 498 meters. We were almost at our planned leveling depth, suspended in that zone where the last traces of surface light faded into permanent darkness. The water outside the viewport looked like blue ink, thick and impenetrable. Then something changed in that darkness. A shift in the uniformity, a suggestion of shape where there shouldn't be one. Payne saw it too. Oh my God, there's something out there. The shape materialized slowly from the gloom, resolving itself into something massive and pale. I could make out the broad head first, wider than our entire submersible, with a blunt snout that looked like it had been carved from ancient stone. Scars covered the visible surface. long pale lines crisscrossing the gray-white skin in patterns that spoke of decades, maybe centuries, of survival. The body came next, impossibly thick and powerful, tapering back into the darkness beyond our limited range of vision. Pectoral fins the size of kayaks cut through the water with barely any visible movement. And the jaws, I could see the edge of them, the massive triangular teeth that belonged in a museum display, not here in living flesh. I recognized the shape from fossil reconstructions I'd seen in books and documentaries, the proportions, the sheer size, the way the head connected to those massive jaws. I'd spent enough time studying marine biology to know what I was looking at, even if my brain refused to accept it. A megalodon, alive and moving directly toward the specter. Pain wouldn't shut up behind me. Oh my God, are you seeing this? Chat, are you seeing this? His voice pitched higher with every word, practically bouncing in his seat. The phone in his hand trembled as he kept the camera pressed against the viewport. This is a living megalodon, an actual living megalodon. I told you guys this was worth it. I told you. I cut the engines. The sudden silence felt wrong. The low electric hum that had been a constant companion since we left the surface disappeared, leaving only the faint creaking of the titanium hull adjusting to pressure and Payne's rapid breathing. My hands moved to the neutral buoyancy controls without conscious thought, 15 years of muscle memory taking over while my brain tried to process what I was looking at through the small circle of reinforced glass. The Spectre began to drift, momentum carrying us forward through the black water at a slow glide. I didn't touch the thrusters, didn't adjust our angle. Movement attracted predators. Every dive manual I'd ever read, every training session I'd sat through, every close call with territorial sharks, they all said the same thing. Stay still. Let them pass. Don't engage. The megalodon kept coming. 25 meters. 22. 20. I could make out individual scars now, pale lines crisscrossing the creature's broad head. Some looked fresh, pink tissue visible beneath translucent skin. Others had healed into thick ridges that caught what little light filtered down from above. This thing had been fighting. For years, probably. Decades, maybe. How long did these animals live? Nobody knew. Nobody had ever studied one because they were supposed to be extinct. 18 meters. The massive triangular teeth became distinct shapes instead of a general impression of size. They overlapped each other in rows, some as long as my hand from wrist to fingertip. The upper jaw protruded slightly beyond the lower, giving the shark's face a permanent expression somewhere between curiosity and hunger. I couldn't tell which. 15 meters. Bryce. Payne's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Bryce. What's it doing? Investigating. I kept my own voice level, calm. No sudden noises. Just keep filming. Don't move. The megalodon's head swung left, then right. A slow, deliberate motion that reminded me of the way dogs tested the air for scent. Except this thing didn't have nostrils that worked the way terrestrial animals did. It was reading water displacement, electrical signals from our battery systems, maybe even the carbon dioxide we were exhaling into the scrubbers. Sharks could detect a single drop of blood in an Olympic swimming pool. What could this one sense? 10 meters. I saw the eye. Payne had been right to call it dinner plate-sized. The thing was massive, dark, and reflective, positioned on the side of the shark's head where it could track us without the creature needing to turn. No pupil that I could make out in the dim, bioluminescent glow from our external running lights. Just a black disk that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The megalodon stopped. Its body hung suspended in the water column directly ahead of us, perfectly motionless, except for the slight movement of its gill slits. Water flowed through them in rhythmic pulses, 5 vertical lines on each side of the massive head opening and closing with mechanical precision. The tail hung straight down, not moving. The pectoral fins extended slightly from the body, holding position. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. The oxygen scrubbers cycled with a soft hiss that suddenly seemed too loud. 4, 5, 6. The head swung again. Left, right, slower this time. Then the eye locked onto the viewport. I felt it more than saw it. A shift in focus, a change in the quality of attention being directed at our small titanium sphere. The megalodon's entire body language transformed in an instant. Where it had been curious, investigative, it now became something else, entirely. The massive body went rigid. Every muscle visible beneath the pale skin tensed, creating definition where there had been smooth curves. The pectoral fins, which had been angled downward in a neutral position, suddenly extended outward from the body at sharp angles. The gill slits flared wider. The jaw opened slightly, not in threat, but in what I recognized from 100 shark dives as a stress response. "Oh, fuck." Payne's whisper barely carried over the distance between us. "Oh, fuck. It sees us." The megalodon began to move, not toward us, around us. It swam in a tight circle, maybe 8 meters in diameter, its eye never leaving the viewport. The movement was precise, controlled, nothing like the lazy cruising pattern from before. This was deliberate, purposeful. The massive tail swept back and forth in short, powerful strokes that should have created turbulence I could feel through the hull, but the water around us remained eerily still. I'd seen this before. Bull sharks in the Bahamas, tigers off the coast of South Africa, even a few great whites during a research dive near Guadalupe Island. Territorial display. The kind of behavior males exhibited when another male entered their hunting ground. Circle, posture, show size and strength. Usually it ended with one shark backing down, swimming away to find easier waters. Usually. Pain. I kept my eyes on the viewport, tracking the megalodon's path as it completed its first circuit and started a second. "Stop talking. Stop moving. Let it. It can see us," he interrupted, his earlier excitement completely gone. The phone in his hand shook hard enough that I could hear it tapping against the glass. "The coding isn't working. Bryce, it can see us." "No." The pieces clicked together in my head with the kind of cold clarity that only came during emergencies. "No, it can't." The megalodon completed its second circle and started a third, tighter this time. 7 meters, maybe 6.5. The eye tracked us with unwavering focus, that massive black disk reflecting our running lights back at us in tiny pinpoints of blue-green luminescence. I understood. "It's seeing its reflection," I said. The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, the same tone I used when explaining technical specifications to clients who didn't understand the equipment. "The polychrome coating, it's acting like a mirror." "What?" Payne shifted behind me, and I heard the phone scrape against something, probably the edge of the viewport frame. "What do you mean, a mirror?" The shark completed its third circle. 6 meters now. Definitely 6 meters. Its path was contracting with each pass, bringing that massive scarred head closer to our hull. "The coating reflects light," I explained, watching the creature's pectoral fins flare wider as it swung past the viewport again. "Perfect reflection. We're invisible because we look like the surrounding water. But to the shark, we look like another shark," Payne finished. "Yeah." I ran through our options. Start the engines and try to ascend. Movement would trigger a chase response. Drop ballast and emergency surface. Same problem. Plus we'd be rising through 498 meters at dangerous speed with no way to equalize pressure. Stay still and hope it lost interest. Except it wasn't losing interest. It was getting more agitated. The megalodon's fourth circle brought it within 5 meters. Close enough that I could see individual teeth moving slightly in the gums, held in place by cartilage that would let them rotate forward when the jaw opened fully. Close enough to make out the lateral line running along its flank, a pale stripe of sensory organs that detected vibration and electrical signals, close enough to see the muscles in its jaw tensing. "It thinks we're a rival," I said, more to myself than to Payne. "Another male in its territory." The fifth circle. 4.5 meters. The tail swept closer to the viewport with each pass, near enough that I could see the individual scales, dermal denticles technically, that covered the skin. They overlapped like armor plating, designed to reduce drag and protect against the teeth of other predators. Other megalodons. "Bryce." Payne's voice cracked on my name. "Bryce, what do we do?" I watched the shark complete its sixth circle at 4 meters, its eye fixed on the viewport where our faces would be visible as dark shapes behind the polychrome glass. Fixed on its own reflection, seeing another massive predator staring back with the same unwavering focus. "Nothing," I said. "We do nothing. We're in its territory and it thinks we're another megalodon." The megalodon finished its circle, and then everything about its movement changed. The slow, deliberate patrol around the specter stopped. The shark's body went rigid for half a second, fins flattening against its sides. And then it accelerated directly toward us, with a speed I hadn't thought possible for something that massive. The water displacement was visible even in the dark. A wall of pressure moving straight at the viewport. I locked my arms against the controls and pressed my back hard into the seat. The impact hit like a freight train. Metal screamed. The entire submersible rang with a high-pitched vibration that rattled my teeth and made my vision blur. My harness cut into my shoulders and chest as the force slammed me forward, then snapped me back against the seat. The control panel flickered. Warning lights blinked red across the instrument cluster. My head whipped to the side and I tasted copper in my mouth where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. Behind me, Payne let out a scream that was half terror, half shock. I heard the clatter of his phone hitting the deck plating, skittering somewhere near my feet. The megalodon pulled back from the viewport. I watched its head shake violently from side to side, jaws opening and closing in what looked like confusion or pain. The reflective coating must have made the impact feel like hitting another shark head-on. The creature's eye rolled in its socket, the black disc catching what little ambient light remained. Then it charged again. I didn't have time to brace properly. The second impact came from a slightly different angle, catching the starboard side of the titanium sphere. The entire sub rotated 15 degrees to port. I grabbed the stabilization controls, but my hands were shaking badly enough that I fumbled the first attempt. More warning lights. The depth gauge needle jumped and settled. 503 meters. We'd dropped another 5 meters from the impact alone. Payne was shouting something behind me, but I couldn't make out the words over the ringing in my ears and the groan of stressed metal. I forced myself to look at the viewport. The spiderweb pattern of cracks spread across the upper right corner of the polychrome glass. Not deep fractures, not yet, but visible lines radiating outward from a central impact point about the size of my fist. The glass was rated for depths exceeding 1,000 meters under normal conditions, but repeated impacts from a creature that size weren't part of the normal testing parameters. The megalodon circled again, tighter this time, maybe 3 meters out. Its body language had shifted from territorial display to full aggression. The scars along its flank seemed more pronounced now, raised tissue that had survived decades of deep ocean violence. This wasn't a creature that backed down from perceived threats. I made a decision. My hands went to the thruster controls, and I pushed the joystick forward, angling us away from the shark and engaging the electric motors at half power. The Spectre responded immediately, the low hum returning as we began moving through the water at a steady 3 knots. Not fast enough to trigger a chase response in most predators, but enough to create distance. The Megalodon matched our speed exactly. It stayed directly in front of us, massive head centered in the viewport, maintaining the same 3-meter gap. When I angled the sub to port, the shark mirrored the movement. When I tried starboard, it followed with perfect precision. The creature wasn't chasing us. It was staying locked onto its own reflection, treating the Spectre as another megalodon trying to flee its territory. I pulled back to neutral and we drifted to a stop. The shark stopped too, suspended in the water directly ahead, gill slits pumping steadily. "Why isn't it leaving?" Payne's voice came out hoarse, strained. "We're moving away. Why is it following us?" "It sees itself," I said. "Every time we move, the reflection moves. It thinks we're mirroring it." "So what do we do?" I didn't answer. There wasn't a good answer. The megalodon's head swung left, then right. The movement was sharper now, more agitated. I watched its pectoral fins extend fully, the massive triangular structures going rigid. Territorial aggression in sharks typically followed a predictable pattern: investigation, display, physical contact, and then, if the rival didn't retreat, escalation to serious violence. We were well past the display phase. The shark charged again. This time I saw it coming early enough to register the details: the way its entire body compressed before the acceleration, the way its jaw dropped open slightly, exposing the rows of serrated teeth, the way its eye stayed locked on the viewport, even as it closed the distance. The impact hit the port side. Something cracked audibly inside the hull, not the pressure sphere itself, but one of the external housings. I saw it on the monitor before the screen went black. The port side camera mount shearing away from the sub's exterior, the lens assembly tumbling into the dark water below us. The feed cut to static. Jesus Christ. Payne was gripping the back of my seat hard enough that I could feel the pressure through the frame. "It's going to kill us." "It's reacting to stimulus," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "We need to eliminate the stimulus." "What does that mean?" "The lights. Turn off the external floods, so it can't see the reflection." I didn't wait for him to respond. My hand went to the lighting controls and I killed the external floods completely. The viewport went black. Not the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. There was still faint blue light filtering down from far above, and tiny bioluminescent organisms drifted past like stars in slow motion, but dark enough that the polychrome coating should have stopped reflecting a clear image. Should have. I pulled up the sonar display, the only reliable instrument we had left with one camera gone. The green screen showed the megalodon's outline clearly, a massive, elongated shape holding position about 4 meters directly ahead of us. It circled once, slower this time, the movement almost lazy. Then the outline accelerated. I watched the shape on the sonar close the distance in less than 2 seconds. The impact hit us head-on, directly against the viewport. The sound was different this time, not the ringing bell tone of the first strikes, but a deeper, more resonant crack that I felt in my chest. The entire sub shuddered. The instrument panel flickered again, and 2 more warning lights came on: hull integrity and life support. The polychrome coating was still reflecting. Even the faint bioluminescent glow was enough for the glass to mirror back a distorted image of the shark itself. We hadn't eliminated the stimulus. We'd just made it harder to see. And the megalodon was done investigating. The megalodon slammed into the viewport again. The entire submersible lurched backward from the force. My shoulder hit the control panel, hard enough that I felt the bruise forming instantly. More cracks spread across the polychrome glass in jagged lines, branching out from the original impact point, like lightning frozen in place. The spiderweb pattern now covered nearly a third of the viewport, obscuring my view of the water outside. A new alarm joined the existing warnings. This one was higher pitched, more urgent than the others. I didn't need to check the display to know what it meant. But I looked anyway. Hull integrity compromised. The words glowed red on the screen, pulsing in time with the alarm. Below them, a schematic of the Spectre showed the damage locations. The viewport was highlighted in crimson. So was a section near the base of the pressure sphere, where the shark's last attack had apparently done more damage than I'd realized. I reached for the ballast controls. If I couldn't outmaneuver the shark, maybe I could outrun it vertically. I pulled the lever to dump ballast, initiating an emergency ascent. The Spectre responded immediately, angling upward as compressed air forced water out of the ballast tanks. The depth gauge numbers began climbing. 500 meters, 498, 495. The Megalodon followed. I watched it on the sonar display. That massive elongated shape tracking our movement perfectly. The shark adjusted its position, diving slightly before accelerating upward. It came at us from below this time, jaws open, head angled to strike. The impact hit the underside of the pressure sphere. The entire sub flipped 15 degrees nose up. I grabbed the control stick to compensate, fighting against the sudden shift in orientation. The depth gauge stuttered. 492, 494, 491. We were still rising, but the ascent had become erratic. I reversed the ballast immediately, flooding the tanks again to stop our climb. An uncontrolled ascent from this depth would kill us just as surely as the shark. The pressure differential would cause the bends, nitrogen bubbles forming in our blood and tissues. Even if the hull held, we wouldn't survive. The Spectre leveled out at 487 meters. I tried the opposite approach, engaging the descent thrusters and adding water to the ballast tanks. The sub began sinking, dropping past 500 meters again. 505, 510, 515. The Megalodon adjusted without hesitation. It rose above us this time, positioning itself directly overhead. I could see it on the upward-facing camera monitor, a dark silhouette against the faint blue glow of the water above. The shark's body compressed, muscles tensing for another strike. It came down like a hammer. The impact drove us deeper. 520 meters, 525, 530. The hull groaned under the increased pressure. New warnings appeared on the display, yellow indicators turning orange as we exceeded the Spectre's recommended operating depth. I stopped the descent, leveling us out again, but the damage was done. We'd lost another camera mount. The starboard display had gone black, joining the dead portside feed. Every maneuver I attempted, the shark countered. I tried banking left, engaging the lateral thrusters to slide sideways through the water. The Megalodon circled with us, keeping pace effortlessly. I tried banking right, then combining movements, ascending while turning, descending while accelerating forward. Nothing worked. The shark stayed locked on the viewport, always keeping us face to face with that reflective coating. It wasn't hunting behavior anymore. I'd seen sharks hunt. They circled, they tested, they struck from angles that gave them advantage. This was different. The Megalodon wasn't trying to eat us. It was fighting us. Fighting what it thought was another male Megalodon in its territory. The shark charged again, straight on. I saw its eye through the cracked viewport, that black disc reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. The jaw opened wider this time, teeth fully exposed. Each tooth was the size of my hand, serrated edges designed to shear through flesh and bone. The impact shook the entire pressure sphere. I heard something crack inside the hull, Not the viewport this time. Something deeper, more structural. The sound echoed through the titanium, a sharp metallic snap that made my teeth hurt. Then I felt water on my feet. I looked down. A thin stream was seeping through a seal near the base of my seat, where the control housing met the floor of the pressure sphere. The water was ice cold, shockingly so even through my boots. It pooled around my heels, spreading slowly across the deck plating. "We're flooding." Payne's voice came from behind me, high and strained. "Oh God, we're flooding." I didn't answer. I was too busy calculating. The seal failure meant the pressure sphere's integrity was compromised. At this depth, even a small breach could cascade into catastrophic failure. The water pressure outside was over 700 pounds per square inch. If the seal gave way completely, the ocean would come in like a hydraulic press. Payne's breathing had changed. The rhythm was wrong. Too fast, too shallow. I glanced back at him. He was pressed against the rear of his seat, both hands gripping the armrests. His face was pale, eyes wide and unfocused. Tears were running down his cheeks. "Please," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "Please, I don't want to die down here." He started praying. I couldn't make out the words. They came too fast, tumbling over each other in a breathless stream. His whole body was shaking. I turned back to the controls. The megalodon was circling again, tighter than before. 3 meters out, then 2.5. Its movements had become more aggressive, more erratic. The shark was getting frustrated. Whatever it saw in our reflection, whatever rival it thought it was fighting, wasn't backing down, wasn't fleeing, wasn't submitting. The polychrome coating was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was reflecting the environment perfectly, creating a mirror image so precise that the shark couldn't tell the difference between us and itself. That was the problem. I stared through the cracked viewport at the coating visible along the edge of the glass. The material looked almost liquid in the faint ambient light, shifting and shimmering as the sub moved through the water. It was beautiful, in a way, a perfect technological achievement, and it was going to kill us. The shark slammed into us again. The viewport cracks spread further, reaching the lower left corner now. The water around my feet deepened, climbing over my ankles. The seal was failing faster. Another alarm joined the chorus. This one was for life support. The impact had damaged something in the oxygen scrubber system. I could see it on the display. Reduced efficiency, backup systems engaging automatically. I couldn't remove the coating. It was bonded to the hull, molecularly fused during construction. There was no way to strip it off, no emergency release mechanism. The designers had never anticipated needing to remove it underwater. But I needed to destroy the reflection somehow. I needed to break the mirror, make it stop showing the shark its own image. If I could disrupt the coating's reflective properties, even temporarily, maybe the shark would lose interest. Maybe it would see us as something other than a rival male. My eyes fell on the electrical system panel. The Spectre had external grounding electrodes built into the hull. They were designed to dissipate static buildup from moving through the water, preventing electrical discharge that could damage sensitive equipment. The electrodes were positioned at key points around the pressure sphere, including 2 near the viewport. They carried voltage, not much under normal circumstances, just enough to bleed off accumulated charge. But the system had a manual override, a safety feature that let the pilot boost the output in case of electrical emergency. I pulled up the electrical schematic on the display. The grounding electrodes showed as small circles on the hull diagram. I traced the circuit with my eyes, following the connections back to the main power system. The override control was buried in a submenu, 3 screens deep. The shark charged again. I braced for impact, but this time it pulled up short, stopping half a meter from the viewport. It hung there, suspended in the water, jaws opening and closing rhythmically. The eye was locked on the glass, on the reflection it saw there. Water continued seeping through the failed seal, cold and relentless around my calves now. I navigated through the menus, selecting the electrical override option. A warning appeared on the screen. Caution. Manual activation may cause equipment damage. Proceed? I selected yes. I needed to reroute everything. The electrical panel sat beneath the main console, a square access hatch with 6 recessed bolts that I'd never actually opened during operation. My fingers found the release latch and twisted it counterclockwise. The panel dropped open on spring-loaded hinges, revealing a mess of color-coded wiring, circuit breakers, and junction boxes that looked like something out of a submarine from the 70s. The Spectre was experimental, sure, but some of the core systems were borrowed from older designs because they worked, and because Payne had cut corners on the retrofit to save money for the polychrome coating. The grounding electrodes were designed to bleed off static charge buildup from the hull. They ran current through the titanium frame at low voltage, preventing electrical interference with the instruments. But the system had capacity. I'd seen the specs when I reviewed the Spectre's electrical diagrams before agreeing to pilot it. The electrodes could handle a massive surge if the breakers were bypassed and the main battery was redirected. It would fry the system afterward, probably permanently. But if I sent enough current through the hull, the polychrome coating might react. The molecular structure of the coating was designed to reflect light perfectly, but it was also conductive. Overloading it could disrupt the reflection, maybe even cause it to shimmer or distort enough that the megalodon would stop seeing its own image. That was the theory. I had no idea if it would actually work. I reached into the panel and found the main power relay, a heavy rectangular component with 3 thick cables running into it. The cables were labeled in faded yellow print: primary, secondary, and ground. I needed to disconnect the primary and secondary from the life support and propulsion systems, then reroute them directly to the grounding electrodes. My hands were shaking. The water around my ankles was cold, creeping higher with every second, and I could hear it dripping from somewhere behind me, a steady rhythmic sound that matched the groan of the hull under pressure. Payne's hand clamped down on my shoulder, hard enough that I felt his fingers dig into the muscle. I flinched and turned my head. His face was pale, slick with sweat, eyes wide and darting between me and the viewport. He was breathing fast, almost hyperventilating. "What are you doing?" His voice cracked on the last word, high-pitched and desperate. "We need to surface. Now. We need to get out of here." I pulled my shoulder free and turned back to the panel. "The shark won't let us surface." "Then do something else. Anything. Just get us out." I didn't answer. There wasn't time to explain, and he wouldn't understand the technical side of it anyway. He'd hired me to pilot the sub and keep him safe, and right now that meant ignoring him and focusing on the wiring in front of me. I grabbed the primary cable and traced it back to the first junction box, then found the breaker that controlled the flow. It was a heavy switch, the kind you had to pull with both hands. I wrapped my fingers around it and yanked. The breaker came free with a metallic clunk, and half the lights on the instrument panel went dark. The oxygen scrubber alarm, which had been wailing in the background, cut out. So did the depth gauge backlight and the sonar display. Payne made a strangled noise behind me. "What did you just do?" "Rerouting power." I didn't look at him. My hands were already moving to the secondary cable, finding the second breaker. This one controlled the propulsion system. I hesitated for half a second because pulling it meant we'd lose the thrusters entirely. No maneuvering, no ascent control, nothing. We'd be drifting at the mercy of the current and the megalodon. But the thrusters hadn't helped. Every time I'd tried to move, the shark had followed, matched our speed, countered every turn. The propulsion system was useless. I pulled the second breaker. The low hum of the electric motors died. The sub went completely silent except for the dripping water and the faint creak of the hull. Payne's breathing was loud in the confined space, ragged and uneven. The third breaker controlled the grounding system itself. I needed to pull it so I could bypass the voltage regulator and send the full battery output directly to the electrodes. I found it on the far right side of the panel, a smaller switch with a red safety cover. I flipped the cover open and pulled the breaker. A small spark jumped from the contact point, bright in the dim light, and I smelled ozone. Now came the hard part. I needed to physically connect the main battery output to the grounding electrode relay. The cables were thick, industrial grade, and they didn't want to bend. I had to pull them free from their housing clamps, reroute them around the junction boxes, and lock them into place on the grounding relay terminals. My fingers were clumsy, slipping on the rubber insulation. The water around my ankles sloshed as the sub shifted slightly, rocking in the current. I braced myself against the console and kept working. Payne was talking again, his voice rising in pitch. Bryce, listen to me. We're flooding. The hull is compromised. We need to ascend. We need to... I said, hold on. Hold on? We're going to die down here if you don't... Shut up. I didn't shout it, but my voice was hard enough that he stopped mid-sentence. I heard him take a breath, then another, trying to calm himself. It didn't work. His breathing stayed fast and shallow, the sound of someone on the edge of panic. I got the first cable connected. The terminal was tight, and I had to use both hands to twist the locking ring into place. My knuckles scraped against the metal edge of the panel, drawing blood, but I didn't stop. I moved to the second cable, pulled it free from its clamp, and started threading it toward the relay. The sub rocked again, harder this time, and I heard Payne gasp. I glanced up at the viewport. The megalodon was turning. It had been circling, holding position about 4 meters out, but now it was angling its body, lining up for another charge. The massive head swung toward us, the scarred snout catching the faint ambient light. Its pectoral fins extended, rigid, and locked into position. The tail began to pump, slow at first, then faster. It was building speed. I looked back at the panel. The second cable was halfway connected, but the locking ring was cross-threaded. I tried to twist it, but it wouldn't move. I forced it, putting all my strength into it, and felt the threads catch. I twisted again, and the ring started to turn. My hands were slick with sweat and blood, and the metal was cold and unforgiving. The shark was accelerating. I could see it in my peripheral vision, the dark shape growing larger, the water displacement creating ripples that distorted the viewport's cracked surface. It was maybe 10 meters out now, then 8. The tail pumped harder, and the body compressed, coiling like a spring. I got the second cable locked into place. My hands moved to the master switch, a heavy lever on the left side of the panel. It was designed to be a fail-safe, a way to shut down the entire electrical system in an emergency. But if I flipped it the other way, it would send the full battery output through whatever system was connected to the relay. Right now, that was the grounding electrodes. Payne was gripping the back of my seat with both hands. I could feel the sub vibrating under his weight. Or maybe it was just him shaking. He was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. My ears were ringing, and my focus was locked on the switch. The megalodon was 6 meters out. 5. Its eye was visible, that massive black disc reflecting the faint light, locked onto the viewport, locked onto its own reflection. The jaws were starting to open, revealing rows of serrated teeth, each one the size of my hand. The scarred head was aimed directly at the center of the cracked glass. I wrapped my fingers around the master switch. The water at my feet was ankle deep, cold enough that I'd lost feeling in my toes. The hull groaned, a deep metallic sound that vibrated through the pressure sphere. Another seal was failing somewhere. Maybe more than one. The life support system was offline. The propulsion was offline. The cameras were gone. All we had left was the hull integrity, and that was failing too. 4 meters. The shark's body was fully extended now, streamlined and fast, cutting through the water like a torpedo. The tail was a blur of motion. The pectoral fins were tucked back, reducing drag. It was coming straight at us, no hesitation, no deviation. Just raw power and speed and aggression. I had one chance. If this didn't work, the next impact would breach the hull completely. The viewport would shatter, or the pressure sphere would crack, and the ocean would come pouring in at 500 meters depth. We'd have maybe 10 seconds before the pressure crushed us. Maybe less. 3 meters. I could see individual scars on the shark's head, old wounds from battles fought in the deep. I could see the texture of its skin, the rough dermal denticles that made it look like armored plating. I could see the teeth, each one a perfect triangle designed to tear through flesh and bone. 2 meters. The jaws opened wider. The eye stayed locked on the viewport. On us. On the reflection it thought was a rival. I threw the master switch. The switch clicked under my thumb, and every battery cell inside the Spectre dumped its charge straight into the hull. I felt the surge before I saw it. A low vibration traveled through the titanium frame and into my seat, into my boots, where they pressed against the deck. The electrical hum that had been barely audible became a sustained whine that filled the entire pressure sphere. My teeth ached from it. The instrument panel flickered once, twice, then half the readouts went completely dark as the power draw exceeded what the regulators could compensate for. Through the viewport, I watched the transformation happen in real time. The seawater touching the polychrome coating started breaking apart at the molecular level. Electrolysis. The electrical current ripped the hydrogen and oxygen bonds apart, and within 2 seconds, microscopic bubbles began forming on every centimeter of the mirrored surface. They appeared first as a faint haze, like condensation on glass, but the rate of generation accelerated exponentially. 3 seconds in, the bubbles became dense enough to obscure the coating's reflective properties. 4 seconds, and the entire visible section of hull outside the viewport was covered in a thick layer of white foam that clung to the surface and spread outward in all directions. The perfect mirror vanished beneath an opaque cloud. I couldn't see the megalodon anymore. The foam was too thick, too uniform. It looked like we'd been wrapped in cotton or dunked into milk. The sleek, invisible predator that had been stalking its own reflection was gone, replaced by a submersible that now looked like a drifting mass of sea foam. The shark had been less than 10 meters away when I flipped the switch. I'd seen it accelerating, jaws opening, body compressed for maximum thrust. The attack run had been committed, locked in. But now, through the white haze of bubbles clinging to the viewport's outer surface, I saw the massive shape twist violently to the side. The megalodon veered, its entire body contorted mid-charge, tail whipping hard to the left, pectoral fins angling sharply to redirect momentum that had been building for a head-on collision. The turn was so abrupt that I saw the water displacement around its flank, saw the pressure wave ripple outward as thousands of pounds of muscle changed direction in less than a second. The creature passed within a meter of the viewport, close enough that I could make out individual scars crisscrossing its flank in brutal detail. Deep grooves ran parallel along the dorsal side, old wounds that had healed into raised ridges of scar tissue. Smaller marks peppered the area near the gills, circular impressions that might have come from sucker-toothed squid or another predator I couldn't identify. The dermal denticles covering its skin caught faint ambient light as the shark slid past, each one a tiny armored scale designed to reduce drag and increase speed. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the foam-covered viewport. I didn't move. My hand stayed frozen on the master switch, my other hand gripping the edge of the control panel hard enough that my knuckles went white. Behind me, pain made a sound that might have been a gasp or a sob. I couldn't tell which, and I didn't turn to look. My eyes stayed locked on the viewport, on the layer of bubbles still clinging to the polychrome coating and obscuring everything beyond. The sonar was still active. I could see the display on the lower left section of the instrument panel, one of the few readouts that hadn't gone dark when I dumped the batteries. The megalodon's return signal appeared as an elongated shape moving in a slow arc around the Spectre's position. It was circling us. The shark completed one full rotation, maintaining a distance of roughly 5 meters. The movement was deliberate, controlled, not the tight, aggressive circles it had been making before, but something slower. Searching. The massive eye passed across the section of viewport I could still see through the foam. A dark reflective disc that swept left to right as the creature's head swung in our direction. It was looking for the rival, the other megalodon that had been here seconds ago, the one that had matched its movements and held its ground in contested territory. That rival had vanished the instant the bubbles formed, and now the shark was trying to locate it. I held my breath. The oxygen scrubber was offline, so holding my breath didn't accomplish anything except making me lightheaded. But I did it anyway. Some instinct I couldn't override told me to stay completely still, to minimize every possible stimulus that might draw the shark's attention back to us. The megalodon's circling pattern tightened slightly, 6 meters out, then 5.5. The sonar showed the creature angling its body at different trajectories as it moved, testing angles, searching for visual confirmation of what it had been fighting moments before. But the bubble layer held. The foam coating the hull was thick enough and uniform enough that no clear reflection could form. Whatever the shark saw when it looked at us now, it wasn't another megalodon. The circle widened again. 7 meters. 8. I watched the sonar return shift as the shark's path expanded outward, moving away from the Spectre in a slow spiral. The creature was disengaging, abandoning the hunt for a rival that no longer existed. My chest burned from holding air in my lungs, but I waited 3 more seconds before exhaling slowly through my nose. The sound felt too loud inside the pressure sphere, even with the electrical whine still present in the background. The megalodon completed another rotation at 10 meters out, then turned away. The sonar showed the elongated shape moving in a straight line now, heading east and down, deeper into the trench. The return signal grew fainter as distance increased, the outline becoming less distinct on the display. 15 meters, 20, 30. The creature was swimming with purpose, not lingering or circling back. It had made a decision and committed to it. I kept my eyes on the sonar, tracking the signal as it faded. 40 meters, 50. The outline blurred further, breaking apart into scattered pixels that could have been the shark or could have been interference from the damaged systems. 60 meters, and the return disappeared completely. The megalodon was gone. I stared at the empty sonar display for another 10 seconds, waiting for the signal to reappear. It didn't. The screen showed nothing but the faint static pattern of background noise and the occasional drift of smaller objects, probably bioluminescent organisms or debris suspended in the water column. No massive, elongated shape. No indication of a predator holding position just outside sensor range. We were alone. I reached over and flipped the master switch back to the neutral position, cutting the electrical surge. The whine from the hull faded into a low hum, then disappeared entirely, leaving only the sound of water dripping somewhere inside the pressure sphere. The instrument panel remained dark except for a few backup systems still running on emergency reserves. I didn't wait to see if the polychrome coating would clear itself of bubbles. The megalodon was gone, but the Spectre was flooding, and we had 600 meters of ocean between us and the surface. My hands moved to the ballast controls, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought struggled to catch up. I pulled the lever that would dump the remaining ballast tanks, releasing iron pellets into the water below us. The submersible shuddered as the weight dropped away, and I felt the subtle shift in momentum as we began to rise. The depth gauge showed 503 meters. The viewport showed nothing but white foam clinging to the polychrome glass, blocking any view of the water beyond. I couldn't see if the shark was circling back. I couldn't see if we were drifting toward the trench wall or open water. I couldn't see anything. I pulled my attention to the instrument panel, scanning the readouts that still functioned. Depth gauge, compass, internal pressure monitor, oxygen reserve indicator, and the sonar display in the lower left corner. Everything else was either offline or flickering between operational and failed. The propulsion system was still disconnected from the rerouted circuits I'd modified during the attack. I considered reconnecting it, but the manual controls for ascent were more reliable in a damaged submersible. Adding power to compromised thrusters could short the entire electrical system, and I wasn't willing to risk it. The depth gauge ticked backwards slowly. 502 meters. 501. 500. Water sloshed around my boots, cold enough that I could feel it through the steel toes. The leak near my seat hadn't stopped. If anything, it sounded worse now, a steady stream instead of the earlier trickle. I glanced down and saw the water level had risen past my ankles, dark and filthy with hydraulic fluid or grease from somewhere inside the hull. The pressure sphere was supposed to be watertight, but the megalodon's impacts had compromised seals I couldn't see or reach. I didn't know how many more we had, or how quickly they'd fail. I adjusted the ballast trim to keep the Spectre's ascent steady. Not too fast, not too slow. Rising too quickly at this depth would cause decompression issues with the hull itself, expanding air pockets in damaged sections and potentially blowing out weakened seals. Rising too slowly meant more time for water to flood the interior and drag us back down. I aimed for a controlled climb around 15 meters per minute and watched the gauge to make sure we held that rate. Payne hadn't said anything since I flipped the switch. I didn't turn around to check on him. My focus stayed on the instruments, on the sonar screen that showed empty water in every direction, on the depth gauge that kept ticking backward at the pace I needed. 490 meters, 485, 480. The sonar pinged steadily, sending out pulses and waiting for returns. I saw small shapes drift past on the display, probably debris or bioluminescent organisms, but nothing large, nothing that moved with purpose. The megalodon's return signal didn't reappear. I kept watching anyway, my eyes flicking to the screen every few seconds, waiting for the elongated shape to materialize at the edge of the sonar's range. It didn't. 470 meters. 460. The water around my shins felt heavier now, pressing against my legs with each small movement of the submersible. I recalculated the ballast in my head, estimating how much additional weight the flooding added and how much I'd need to compensate. The Spectre's buoyancy was designed with tolerances for equipment and 2 passengers, but it wasn't designed to carry 50 or 60 liters of seawater inside the pressure sphere. I pulled the ballast lever again, dumping another small portion of the reserve pellets. The ascent rate increased slightly, and I eased it back to 15 meters per minute. 450 meters, 440. My hand stayed on the controls, adjusting trim and monitoring the compass to keep us oriented correctly. The current at this depth was minimal, but I didn't want to drift too far from our original dive coordinates. The support ship would be waiting somewhere above, tracking our ascent beacon if it was still transmitting. I glanced at the communications panel, but the screen was black. No way to confirm if the beacon was active or if the crew knew we were coming up. I assumed they did. I had to. 430 meters. 420. The sonar remained empty. I let myself believe the megalodon had moved on, deeper into the trench, or farther along the shelf where it had come from. The electrical surge and the foam had broken its focus, made its reflection disappear, and without a rival to fight, it had no reason to stay. That was the theory. I didn't trust theories anymore, not after watching a creature that shouldn't exist charge a submersible 6 times in less than 20 minutes. I kept my eyes on the sonar. 410 meters. 400. The water around my legs sloshed harder as the Spectre rocked slightly in a current I couldn't see. I steadied the controls and adjusted the trim again, keeping the nose angled upward at a shallow degree. The viewport was still covered in foam, a solid white barrier that made it impossible to tell if we were ascending through clear water or drifting into a thermocline. I relied entirely on the instruments, on the numbers that told me we were rising and the sonar that told me we were alone. 390 meters. 380. Behind me, Payne shifted in his seat. I heard the creak of the harness straps and the faint sound of his breathing, shallow and uneven. He didn't speak. I didn't prompt him. There wasn't anything to say that would change where we were or what had just happened. The Spectre continued climbing, the depth gauge ticking backward in steady increments, and I focused on keeping it that way. 370 meters. 360. The leak near my seat made a different sound now, more of a hiss than a stream. I glanced down and saw water spraying from a crack I couldn't locate, hitting the deck and adding to the pool around my shins. The internal pressure monitor showed a slow decrease, nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to confirm the hull wasn't sealed anymore. I couldn't stop the leak. I couldn't patch it from inside the sphere. All I could do was keep us rising and hope the seals held long enough to reach the surface. 350 meters. 340. My knuckles ached from gripping the control stick. I loosened my fingers slightly, flexing them to keep the blood flowing, then tightened my grip again. The sonar pinged, the screen refreshed, and I saw the same empty water I'd been seeing for the past 30 minutes. No returns, no movement, just us and the ocean. 330 meters. 320. The water around my legs had risen to mid-shin now, cold enough that I'd stopped feeling my feet inside the boots. I adjusted the ballast again, compensating for the added weight, and watched the ascent rate hold steady, 15 meters per minute. We'd been climbing for over 30 minutes. I calculated the remaining distance and estimated another 10 minutes to the surface if nothing else failed. 10 minutes felt like a long time. 310 meters. 300. The foam on the viewport began to thin slightly, or maybe I imagined it. I couldn't tell if the bubbles were dissipating or if my eyes were playing tricks after staring at white glass for half an hour. I didn't look away from the instruments. The depth gauge mattered more than the view. 290 meters. 280. Payne coughed once, a wet sound that made me think he was crying or trying not to. I still didn't turn around. My job was to get us to the surface. His job was to stay quiet and let me do mine. The Spectre rocked again, harder this time, and I corrected the trim to keep us stable. The current was stronger at this depth, probably an upper thermocline layer pushing us slightly east. I adjusted the compass heading and kept us climbing. 270 meters. 260. The sonar remained clear. I stopped expecting the megalodon to return. It had moved on, and we were alone in the water, ascending slowly through the mid-ocean zone, where sunlight started to filter down but didn't reach far enough to make a difference. The viewport was still white with foam. I couldn't see the water changing color or the faint glow of surface light penetrating from above. I navigated blind, trusting the numbers. 250 meters, 240. The water inside the sphere had stopped rising. I looked down and saw it holding steady just below my knees, sloshing with the submersible's movement but not climbing higher. Either the leak had slowed or the internal pressure had equalized enough to reduce the flow. I didn't care which. It meant we weren't sinking, and that was enough. 230 meters, 220. My breathing had steadied without me noticing. I inhaled through my nose, exhaled through my mouth, and kept my hands on the controls. The Spectre climbed. The sonar stayed empty. The depth gauge kept ticking backward. 210 meters, 200. The foam on the viewport started to break apart. I saw small gaps where the bubbles had dissolved or drifted away, revealing patches of deep blue water beyond the glass. The cracks in the polychrome coating were still there, spider webbing across the upper right corner. But the reflection was gone. The mirror effect had disappeared with the electrical charge, and what remained was just damaged glass and seawater. 190 meters. 180. I adjusted the ballast one more time, fine-tuning the ascent rate as we entered shallower water. The pressure differential was less extreme here, but I didn't want to rush it. The hull was compromised, and any sudden change could make the damage worse. I kept us steady at 15 meters per minute and watched the gauge. 170 meters. 160. The viewport cleared further, foam sliding off the glass in sheets as the bubbles finally dissipated. I could see the ocean now, the familiar deep blue of mid-depth water, lighter than the trench but still dark enough that the sun was only a distant suggestion. No shapes moved in the water. No shadows passed across the viewport. Just empty ocean, the same as the sonar showed. 150 meters, 140. Payne shifted again behind me. I heard his harness creak and the faint sound of him wiping his face, but he still didn't speak. I didn't look back. The depth gauge held my attention, the numbers dropping steadily as we climbed through 130 meters, 120, 110. 100 meters. The water outside the viewport began to brighten, the deep blue shifting to a lighter shade as sunlight penetrated farther down. I could see particles drifting in the current now, tiny specks of organic matter or plankton suspended in the water column. The Spectre rocked gently, the motion smoothing out as we left the deeper currents behind and entered the calmer upper layers. 90 meters. 80. The sonar pinged steadily, showing nothing but open water. I kept watching it anyway, a habit I couldn't break even though I knew the megalodon wasn't following us. It had stayed deep, wherever it had gone, and we were alone. 70 meters. 60. The viewport was almost completely clear now, the last of the foam washed away by the current. I could see the surface above us, a faint ripple of light refracting through the water, still distant but close enough to feel real. My chest loosened slightly, the tension I'd been carrying for the past 40 minutes easing just enough to let me breathe deeper. 50 meters. 40. The water inside the sphere sloshed around my knees as the Spectre angled upward slightly, the buoyancy pulling us toward the surface faster now that we were in shallower water. I adjusted the ballast again, slowing the ascent to keep it controlled. 30 meters. 20. The sunlight grew brighter, filtering through the viewport in sharp beams that cut through the water and illuminated the interior of the sphere. I squinted against the light, my eyes adjusting after so long in the dark. The depth gauge showed 15 meters. 10. 5. The Spectre broke the surface with a lurch, the nose lifting out of the water first before settling back down with a splash. Waves lapped against the hull, and I heard the sound of wind and open air for the first time in over an hour. The viewport showed blue sky and calm seas, the sun bright and high overhead. I blinked against the glare and reached for the hatch release. The manual lock disengaged with a heavy clunk, and I pushed the hatch upward, forcing it open against the slight suction of the pressure differential. Fresh air rushed into the sphere, cold and clean, and I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with it. The smell of salt and ocean replaced the stale, recycled air I'd been breathing since we descended. I looked out across the water and saw the support ship already moving toward us, its white hull cutting through the waves about 200 meters to the west. They'd been tracking us. The beacon must have stayed active. I turned around in my seat and looked at Payne for the first time since the Megalodon had left. He sat slumped in his harness, his face pale and streaked with sweat or tears, staring at nothing. His phone was still on the floor near my feet, screen dark and waterlogged. I gripped the cold metal rungs inside the hatch and pulled myself up, feeling the strain in my shoulders and forearms as I climbed out of the Spectre's titanium sphere. My boots found purchase on the exterior hull, and I stood upright for the first time in hours, balancing carefully on the curved surface that rocked gently with the ocean swells. The sun hit me immediately, warm, bright. I had to squint against it after so long in the darkness below. The heat felt good on my face and arms, soaking through my damp shirt and drying the salt water that had pooled around my feet inside the sub. I took a breath, a real one, not the recycled metallic-tasting air from the scrubber, and the freshness of it made me realize just how stale the atmosphere inside had become. I looked down at the hull beneath my boots, the polychrome coating that had been Payne's $1 million investment, the experimental material that was supposed to make us invisible to everything in the ocean, was completely ruined. The surface was covered in a thick layer of dried salt and chemical residue, white and crusty, left behind from the electrolysis reaction when I dumped the batteries through the grounding electrodes. The perfect mirror finish that had reflected the Megalodon's own image back at itself was gone. Now the coating looked dull and clouded, like frosted glass, with streaks and patches where the foam had clung and dried unevenly. I crouched down and ran my fingers across it. The texture was rough, gritty. Flakes of salt came off on my palm. The coating underneath seemed intact structurally, but its function was destroyed. No reflection, no invisibility. Just a ruined piece of technology that had nearly gotten us killed. Standing back up, I turned slowly on the hull, scanning the horizon. The ocean stretched out in every direction, calm and blue under the afternoon sun. Small waves rolled past, lifting and lowering the Spectre in a steady rhythm. About 200 meters to the west, the support ship was visible, a white-hulled vessel with a crane mounted on the aft deck. It was already moving toward us, cutting through the water at a steady pace, leaving a white wake behind. I heard movement below and glanced back at the open hatch. Payne's head appeared first, then his shoulders. He climbed out slowly, gripping the rungs tightly, his knuckles white. When he stood on the hull beside me, I could see he was still shaking. His hands trembled as he let go of the hatch rim. His face was pale, drained of color, and his eyes looked distant, unfocused. He didn't say anything, didn't look at me, just stood there, staring out at the water like he was trying to convince himself it was real. I didn't push him to talk. There wasn't much to say anyway. We were alive. That was enough for now. The rescue boat came into clearer view as it closed the distance. It was a rigid inflatable, maybe 8 meters long, with a small outboard motor and 3 crew members aboard. I recognized the hull number stenciled on the side. It belonged to the support ship. The crew wore orange life vests and were already preparing lines and fenders as they approached. The boat slowed as it came alongside the Spectre, the driver cutting the throttle and letting the momentum carry them the last few meters. One of the crew members, a younger guy with a shaved head and sunglasses, stood at the bow and tossed a line toward me. I caught it and looped it loosely around one of the Spectre's exterior tie-down points, not securing it fully, but keeping the boat close enough for boarding. Another crew member, older with graying hair and a weathered face, leaned over the side and called out to us. "You two all right?" I nodded. "Yeah, we're good." "Sub's taking on water?" "Some. Hull's compromised but stable. Flooding stopped around mid-shin inside." He nodded, processing that. "We'll get you aboard and secure the sub for towing. Can you move on your own?" "Yeah." He looked past me at Payne, who still hadn't moved or spoken. "What about him?" I glanced back. Payne was staring down at the hull beneath his feet, his jaw clenched, breathing through his nose in short bursts. "He's shaken up," I said. "But he can move." The crew member gestured toward the boat. "All right. Let's get him across first." I turned to Payne and touched his shoulder lightly. He flinched, but looked at me, his eyes finally focusing. "Time to go," I said. He nodded once, a small jerky movement, and stepped toward the edge of the hull. The crew reached out, guiding him as he climbed down onto the inflatable. His legs wobbled when his boots hit the deck, and the older crew member steadied him with a hand on his elbow. Payne didn't resist. He just let himself be guided to a seat, near the stern, where he sat down heavily and wrapped his arms around himself. I followed, gripping the edge of the Spectre's hull and swinging my legs over onto the boat. My boots landed solidly, and I straightened up, feeling the slight give of the inflatable's deck beneath me compared to the rigid titanium I'd just left. The moment I was aboard, I turned back to look at the Spectre. It floated there in the water, nose slightly elevated, the cracked viewport visible even from this angle. The spiderweb fractures in the polychrome glass caught the sunlight, refracting it into faint rainbow patterns. The hull showed scars too, scratches and dents where the megalodon's teeth had scraped and impacted. The portside camera mount was gone entirely, torn off during one of the attacks. The starboard mount hung loose, dangling by a single bolt. It looked like a wreck, a piece of experimental junk that had survived something it was never designed to handle. The younger crew member moved past me and started securing additional lines to the Spectre's tie-down points, preparing it for the tow. Back to the ship. The older one stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "What happened down there?" I met his eyes. He looked genuinely concerned, not just curious. I considered how much to tell him. The truth was complicated. Unbelievable, even. A living megalodon, a prehistoric predator that wasn't supposed to exist, attacking us because it saw its own reflection and thought we were a rival. The experimental coating that was supposed to make us invisible, instead painting a target on our hull. I settled for the simplest version. "We encountered something unexpected," I said. "The sub took damage. We had to surface." He waited, clearly expecting more, but I didn't give it to him. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "All right. You can debrief with the captain once we're back aboard." "Sure." He turned away and joined the other crew member in securing the Spectre. I looked over at Payne, who was still sitting in the stern, staring at nothing. One of the crew had draped a blanket over his shoulders, a rough gray wool emergency blanket from the boat's gear locker. Payne had pulled it tight around himself, gripping the edges with both hands. His phone was gone, still inside the flooded Spectre, waterlogged and useless. All that footage he'd been so excited to capture, the live stream to his followers, the proof of the invisible submarine, it was all lost. He hadn't said a word since we surfaced. Not to me, not to the crew. Just silence and that distant, shell-shocked expression. The driver started the outboard motor, and the inflatable turned slowly, heading back toward the support ship. The Spectre followed behind us, secured by the tow lines, drifting along in our wake. I stood near the middle of the boat, one hand on the safety rail, watching the damaged sub trail behind. The support ship grew larger as we approached. It was a converted research vessel, about 40 meters long, painted white with rust stains near the waterline, and a faded name on the bow I couldn't make out from this angle. The crane on the aft deck was already being positioned, its arms swinging out over the water in preparation to lift the Spectre once we brought it alongside. I glanced back at the sub one more time. The cracked viewport, the ruined coating, the missing cameras. It had held together just long enough. Another few impacts from the megalodon, and the pressure sphere would have failed. The hull would have imploded at that depth, crushing us instantly. But it didn't. We made it. I took another deep breath of the salt air and let it out slowly. My hands had stopped shaking. My pulse had settled back to normal. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that I knew would hit me fully once I stopped moving. The inflatable pulled alongside the support ship, and the crew secured it to the boarding platform. The older crew member gestured for Payne to go first. Payne stood slowly, still clutching the blanket, and climbed onto the platform. Without a word, he disappeared up the ladder toward the main deck. I followed, gripping the ladder rungs and pulling myself up. When I reached the top, I stepped onto the deck and turned to watch the crane lower its hooks toward the Spectre. The crew worked efficiently, attaching the rigging to the sub's lift points, preparing to haul it out of the water. I stood there, arms crossed, and watched them work. The Spectre rose slowly out of the ocean, water pouring off its hull and through the open hatch. It hung suspended from the crane, dripping and damaged, a testament to how badly things could go wrong when you took experimental equipment into an environment that didn't care about your plans. I was done with this. Done with experimental subs. Done with wealthy clients who wanted to push boundaries without understanding the risks. Done with deep ocean dives that put me face to face with things that shouldn't exist. The Spectre swung gently in the air as the crane rotated it over the deck. I turned away before it was fully secured and headed toward the ship's interior, ready to file my report and put this entire dive behind me.